Hey all, this is a short lecture on chapter 15, hallucinogens, PCP, and ketamine. There's a couple things I want you to pay attention to in this chapter. I want you to pay attention to where these drugs are and how they came to be, how they are around, how they are used by different folks. I want you to pay attention to the abuse potential for these substances. I want you to pay attention to the psychological and emotional effects of these substances. And lastly, I really want you to pay attention to the uh, potential benefits of some of these substances. So couple of things that I want y'all to pay attention to there. When we talk about hallucinogens, your book goes into the following. So mescaline, which we get from cactus, psilocybin we get from mushrooms, DMT, which is interesting and unique in and of itself. Sorry, I'm following through with this in the book. So DMT, I'm sorry. So DMT, which is quite interesting. These three here often used in some Native American and culturally ritualistic experiences. So then we've got LSD. On page 505, there's an interesting little bit about how LSD came to be and what we originally wanted to use it for. And how accidentally we came across the idea that it was hallucinogenic. In VMS, I don't know too much about that, except for the fact that it's quite dangerous. It's synthetic. Salvia, yet again, something that's naturally occurring from a plant. And then, of course, they go into the pharmacology of hallucinogenic drugs. And then then we'll talk about PCP and ketamine, and these two are quite interesting in very different ways. So PCP doesn't have the hugest, well, PCP and ketamine don't have the greatest following in terms of people that want to use it. I have a video for you guys of an individual who had just smoked PCP. This is a clip from an intervention. That whole intervention episode is quite fascinating if you get a chance to watch it. It's about Leon. But anyway, and then ketamine. Ketamine is used as a tranquilizer mostly for veterinarians. And what's interesting about ketamine, PCP can lead to some aggressive tendencies, but detached. And then ketamine is very well known for its sort of detached properties. Sort of similarly, actually, the use of all of these drugs can oftentimes be referred to as being detached from your body or removed from your mind, removed from the things that pain you, that bring you pain. Similarly to, if you've ever seen the movie Get Out, every time I think about I think it's called The Sunken Place, if I'm not mistaken. When I think of that image from that movie, I think about those who use hallucinogens, ketamine, these types of substances that give you a deeper dive into your brain, deeper dive into your psyche, a deeper dive into your emotions, and that's for good, bad, or ugly. As you'll see when we talk about the beneficial aspects of these drugs, there is a good part to these, but that requires some. Anyway, I'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so the reason why people like these drugs is because they produce this distorted consciousness, this distorted reality, this distorted perception, this distorted mindset, which is really appealing. And oftentimes liken this to a spiritual event. And because it does take you to what's described as sort of this separate part of your brain, you're more connected with emotions, you're more connected with feelings, you're more connected with others around you. That is, of course, when things are going well. However, you can certainly experience a bad trip and things are not going well, and you don't get this warm, fuzzy, loving, glowing, colorful experience. You get a much more dire, aggressive, frightening, scary feeling. It's not uncommon for folks who use these substances to attempt and ultimately commit suicide for these altered reality experiences, these different perceptions, and then of course just being really fearful and really scared during some of these trips. I'm not going to jump into all this. I want you to read about where all these come from. That's a nice picture, but I want you to read about where all this comes from. Or mushrooms, how folks can get this experience just off of mushrooms. I grew up very early on. I grew up in sort of more rural Mississippi, and so folks attempting to find mushrooms was kind of a pastime. This can sort of be cultivated almost anywhere. Let's see. Let me keep going on here. So here's some more about DMT. Ayahuasca. I have a video about ayahuasca. I want you to pay attention to ayahuasca. Ayahuasca has been used often for the treatment of addiction. Now you have to have the means and the resources to go to South and Central America to have an ayahuasca experience. And of course it has to be, you'll see in the video, but a shaman has to administer this. It's quite lengthy. Can be quite an expensive process, and it can be quite a scary process. And so I just want y'all to watch this video and really sort of pay attention to, put yourself in the perspective of somebody who might be looking to use ayahuasca and this plant, or the two types of plants that make up the ayahuasca drink. I want you to pay attention to maybe what someone who is considering partaking in this type of experience for addictive use disorders, how this must feel for them. But this has been, the use of ayahuasca for mental health discomfort and upset has been around for quite some time, very, very, very long time. LSD, again, 505. Please pay attention to how this came to be and sort of our accidental discovering of how it is hallucinogenic. And you've got an assignment around microdosing. And so I'll spend a few minutes here talking about microdosing. But essentially, microdosing is administering very, very, very small doses of hallucinogens to individuals to combat depression and anxiety, some serious mental health issues, and using these hallucinogens or hallucinogenic drugs as a type of medication. So similarly to how indigenous peoples use ayahuasca for the treatment of various mental health issues and concerns and life situations. The different, LSD and psilocybin can also be used in microdosing for the treatment of mental health issues. In the United States, there are clinical trials for microdosing. This has not become a huge practice as of yet. As a matter of fact, if you were, if a client were interested in this, you guys would have to find a clinic. You'd have to find someone who's doing these clinical trials, to get them in it. And of course, there would be a ton of data collected and tests. The VA at one point was doing quite a few of these microdosing clinical trials. So make sure you read up on that in this chapter. And again, you have an assignment around that. Okay. What I want you to pay attention to, sorry, I skipped over salvia. Salvia is another plant There it is. It looks like mint, as you can see. Okay. Here's how they are administered typically. But so this is quite interesting. This whole section here, it talks about what a good trip is and a bad trip. Good trip being one of those colorful, warm, very spiritually enlightening experience, and then very frightening or disturbing would certainly be a bad trip. And what's interesting about this is that the individual sort of emotional state and who they're around and what's going on can help predict the outcome of these different trips. And so if someone's in a really, really, really bad mood, or they're angry, or they're upset, it probably would not be beneficial to them to have one of these experiences. Here's just for your information, there's a scale that researchers can use related to individuals who use hallucinogens. Let me jump up here because there's something I really want you guys to see. So here's what I want you to see. So hallucinogens are not known for having a real high abuse potential. These are and then you can see here there's no withdrawal. That is, of course, if these are pure. If the hallucinogens, let's say it's somehow in some way, shape, or form taken with something else, then this sentence and this thought just kind of goes out the window. So if you're taking hallucinogens along with other substances, then there may be a higher abuse potential and there may be withdrawal symptoms. But if you're just purely taking hallucinogens, let's say you're taking a hit of LSD, then there's relatively low abuse potential, and there's no withdrawal effects or no withdrawal symptoms. So this is kind of interesting because what we find is individuals aren't getting up every single morning and having the same sort of set of negative consequences and negative life circumstances when they just use hallucinogens. Typically, people use hallucinogens for the experience, and those experiences are usually tied to something, the reason why they want to do this. And they're not reinforcers, so there's not that ever-evolving loop of why one needs to continue, because there is no withdrawal to avoid. However, the dependence does occur, like it says here, in a small number of users, but that's typically early on if individuals start using at an early age. There is a rapid tolerance. While if someone is using this quite regularly, you may need more and more of the substance to achieve the same result. Let me jump to, here real quick. So flashbacks, this can be quite scary when one takes hallucinogens or is using hallucinogens often or regularly. So this is this sort of a buildup of some of the substance, and it's a re-experiencing of the hallucinations when you haven't used, when the drug use has stopped. And they can unfortunately occur really long after using hallucinogens has stopped. And we saw this a lot, certainly in the 60s and 70s, when the use of hallucinogens was much more prevalent, that individuals were experiencing these sort of LSD flashbacks pretty regularly, even though they weren't using anymore. And these flashbacks can result into, can look and result in the sort of psychotic reaction range, and that can be quite scary. Okay, let me jump real quick because I only have a few more minutes or a few seconds here. So PCP and ketamine, quite scary. PCP is not all that widely used anymore, but it certainly still is. And oftentimes people get substances, marijuana, if they're just buying single joints, it might be laced with PCP. And that can be quite scary. It's a lot of aggression, a lot of anger. I talked about ketamine a little bit. So this is typically used for veterinary medicine. and it can have that sort of detached reality. I'm going to stop here. I want you guys to read on the rest of this.